Man, when was the last time I even sat in front of one of these things? Oh yeah, 5 months. Oh boy. This is gonna be interesting. Yeah, it's no secret the trends of retired and extinct steam locomotives have become saturated by this point. As well as that, I was moving on to my own video ideas, and was just about done. Then, out of nowhere, a fan of mine came in and brought me back into it. Everyone, meet Railfan Ian1225, who suggested this video.
Hey guys, I'm really excited to be here today.
With nobody having previously discussed active steam locomotives that have been previously retired in the preservation era, it was only a matter of time until such a suggestion came right to my own doorstep. I'm the Rocket City Railfan,
And I'm Railfan Ian1225.
and we bring you the top 10 formerly retired steam excursion stars
In America.
Number 10. Gulf Mobile and Northern G1 number 425. This 1928 Baldwin Pacific and its sister number 426 were built to replace 4 older ones that the railroad had sold to the Louisville and Nashville. The G1s were only 12 years old when the GM&N merged with the Mobile in Ohio into the Gulf Mobile in Ohio in 1940. Shortly after GM&O decommissioned them in 1950, they were bought by the Louisiana Eastern Railroad to pull gravel, as well as occasional passenger trains alongside the other steam locomotives they collected from other railroads. In 1961, however, the railroad collapsed when its owner, Paulson Spence, died. Most of its collection was scrapped, but 425 was saved the following year by Malcolm Ottinger of the Valley Forge Scenic Railroad in Kimberton, Pennsylvania.
425's first excursion career there was cut short when it was sold to Brian Woodcock and moved to the Wilmington and Western Railroad. Due to the railroad's high axle loads, the G1 didn't turn a wheel under its own power until it was bought by the owner of the Blue Mountain and Reading Railroad, later known as the Reading and Northern, Andrew Muller, in 1983. Then, after 2 years of tourist service, it was joined by Reading T1 number 2102. We may or may not get to that one later.
In 1992, the engine was repainted in a dark blue scheme reminiscent of the original Reading's Crusader Pacifics. It was after this repaint that its career in the 20th century peaked. Most notably was when it appeared at Steamtown National Historic Site's grand opening in July of 1995, along with multiple excursions in the Scranton area.
After a final Tamaqua Fall Fest trip on October 13th, 1996, R&N ended steam operations. 425 wasn't fired up again until December 29th, 2007, following a 2-year overhaul. Within 6 months, the G1 had returned to service with a light blue livery, and a centered headlight with its bell moved to the front of the smoke box.
Besides the countless passenger trains it's pulled between Jim Thorpe and Port Clinton ever since its return, 425 has visited Steamtown a second time, double-headed with CNJ number 113, and even come face-to-face with nickel plate number 765 shortly after it was repainted into its current dark blue and black scheme. Presently, she's been undergoing a 1472-day inspection and overhaul since the beginning of 2023. Whether or not this one will lead to it getting another makeover, the G1 is destined to return to steam in a few years. She has lived a multitude of numbers, owners, and appearances.
Number 9. Brooklyn East District Terminal number 15. Again, it's another story Andrew has told in the past for a video going into more detail. This little saddle tank engine is a 1917 Porter product and is the oldest surviving locomotive of the Brooklyn East District Terminal. It worked as a dockside switcher until Christmas of 1963, then bought and refurbished by the Southern Appalachia Railway in 1965. Like 425, the 15's first excursion career was cut short when it was put into storage following 2 unsuccessful trips on the Yancey Railroad in 1968.
The little tank engine was then bought by the Toledo, Lake Erie, and Western Railway in 1975 for static display. From that point, 15 would have never run again, but in 1998, the Strasbourg Railroad bought the locomotive to use on tourist trips, but quickly found the locomotive was problematic, with its saddle tanks having insufficient water capacity. This would have kept 15 silent, except that around the same time, Thomas the tank engine producer Britt Allcroft approached Strasbourg to film on their property for the film Thomas and the Magic Railroad. This gave Strasbourg the idea to rebuild 15 into a functional standard gauge Thomas, to which the producer thrillingly approved. And so, by the following year of 1999, the 15's second retirement ended with a bang as it emerged from the shops in its new form as the Strasbourg Thomas. Since then, the little blue tank engine, which is the only functioning standard gauge Thomas in North America, has been annually steamed up for the Day Out with Thomas events at Strasbourg, which, by the way, has become one of their most popular events to date.
Despite whatever conditions ignite from 15's rebuild, it still doesn't change the fact that it may have influenced the popularity of the events throughout the continent, as well as possibly leading Strasbourg to build 5 more Thomases and a Percy, all of which are dummy models. And fun fact, 15 was actually technically the first steam locomotive I ever rode behind, although I tend to say it's Little River Railroad number 110 as 15 was in its Thomas form, so I don't really tend to count that. But it was technically the first steam locomotive I ever rode behind back in 2008 at the Cuyahoga Valley, back when they did Day Out with Thomas events. I do remember quite a bit of it actually. I remember watching Thomas pull up, and I remember the departure, but that's really all I remember. However, it was one of the earliest memories I do have. So, yeah, that was pretty fun. I do have pictures of it, but unfortunately I can't find them. Maybe someday I will make a video on my channel about it, and I will show pictures if I can. That is, if I find those pictures. But yeah, I thought I'd say that fun fact.
Number 8. Florida East Coast number 148 was the 8th of the railway's 141 class Pacifics built in 1920 by Alco at Richmond to pull passenger and freight trains between Jacksonville and Miami, Florida, as well as on the oversea route to Key West until its destruction in 1935. Then, in 1952, the Pacific was sold to U.S. Sugar in Lewistown for pulling sugarcane trains from the company's harvest fields to the sugarcane fields alongside 3 other former FEC Pacifics. 148 was the final U.S. sugar steam locomotive to be decommissioned in favor of diesels, with its final revenue run happening in 1968, and then it was bought by Stan Freeman the following year and moved to the Black River and Western Railroad in Ringgoes, New Jersey.
From 1971 to 1977, the 148 operated on multiple tourist railroads in New Jersey as well as on a few mainline excursions, most notably appearing in a segment of The Tomorrow Show when it carried show host Tom Schneider and a film crew on board an excursion on the CNJ mainline from Raritan. I think I said that wrong. I'm very sorry if I did. I'm not great at pronunciations. To Bayhead in December of 1975.
148 became inoperable and was retired in 1977. When Mr. Freeman died in 1982, it was donated to the Connecticut Valley Railroad Museum. From that point on, 148 was moved, bought, and sold all over America as multiple owners attempted to rebuild it, but failed. Fortunately, in 2016, U.S. Sugar, under CEO Robert Bulker Jr., finally acquired 148, and after a thorough restoration, the FEC Pacific was back under steam in 2020 with a cab radio fitted and now burning recycled vegetable oil. Since then, she's been used on multiple excursion and harvest trains under U.S. Sugar lettering.
You know something? 148 has really climbed into my top 20 favorite steam locomotives. Something about its look and the speed it gives, as well as the whistle it first wore. Just always reminds me of old school steam locomotives. I really liked it. Number 7. U.S. Army S-160, number 1702. The 1942 product of Baldwin was intended for overseas duties in the UK, but was instead stationed at the U.S. Army's Fort Bragg base in Fayetteville, North Carolina, where it trained soldiers during the Second World War. When the conflict ended, the S-160 was sold in 1946 to the Warren and Saline River Railroad, or WSR, in Warren, Arkansas, who immediately modified it to North American standards.
When WSR dieselized in 1961, the 1702 was retired, then bought and restored by the Reeder Railroad in Arkansas in 1964. In the process, the locomotive was modified to resemble a civilian locomotive using components from multiple railroads' locomotives, most notably a larger tender from scrapped Rock Island Mikado number 2662. 1702's time in the natural state was uneventful, with the exception of making 2 film appearances and pulling the final mixed revenue train in the US. She was then sold to the Fremont and Elkhorn Valley Railroad so they could acquire the former Chicago and Northwestern line between Fremont and Hooper, Nebraska to run the locomotive on. The S-160 was finally purchased by the Great Smoky Mountains Railroad in North Carolina in September of 1991, and once again modified to look even more like a typical North American steam locomotive. The 1702 re-entered operation on the GSMR in the following June. She was retired for the second time in 2005 due to firebox issues, and not returning to steam until July 21st of 2016, following a 9-year hiatus and 2-year restoration. Presently, the locomotive continues to operate in a Southern-inspired livery on the GSMR, which utilizes the remains of the Southern's Murphy branch between Dillsboro and Nathala.
In the process, however, the S-160's 11-year absence halted and almost derailed the restoration of the Great Smoky Mountain Railroad's other steam locomotive, Southern KS-1 number 722, with work not getting back underway until 2023. Work on 722 is set to be completed sometime in either 2025 or 2026.
Number 6. Baldwin number 26. An 060 tender switcher that spent the first 19 years of its life operating at its own birthplace at the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Eddystone, Pennsylvania. With at least 2 identical sister locomotives, the 26 muscled raw materials around the plant in the company's standard olive green paint.
In 1948, the year before Baldwin turned out its last domestic steam locomotive, 26 was sold to the Jackson Iron and Steel Company in Ohio and renumbered to 3. It's unknown how long the 060 remained in use by JINS, but in 1979 it had been retired.
That was when Jerry Joe Jacobson saved the locomotive from being cut up and eventually had it moved to the former Nickel Plate Road Museum in Bellevue, Ohio, and in the process restored it as Nickel Plate number 17. She was eventually moved and sold to Steamtown at their present location in Scranton, PA by 1990. Upon returning to operation, the 26 was reverted to its original guise and used to shuttle visitors around the site until its grand opening in 1995. After 4 years of shuttling around the site, the engine was once again retired in December of 1999 to undergo a Federal Railroad Administration mandated overhaul. This one took 16 years to complete because of the locomotive's dreadful mechanical shape, from a bent frame to multiple components needing to be completely replaced.
The work was grueling, but nonetheless, on December 10, 2015, just 3 years after Canadian National 3254 was retired, 26 was back under steam, once again leaving Steamtown with at least 1 active steam locomotive.
As of today, the locomotive is still operating and continues its position as the power for the Scranton Limited and Navy Ogg Gorge Limited yard shuttles.
Number 5. Southern Railway number 630. The most well-known consolidation type of Andrew's home railroad, the U.S. Southern Railway, and one of the 2 surviving KS-1s, the other being the aforementioned 722. Over 400 of these consolidations were constructed between 1903 and 1912 by the American Locomotive Company at Richmond and Pittsburgh and the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, though originally as the Class K.
630 was among 32 Ks built in the Richmond plant in 1904, being used in local and branch line service in the Knoxville division, and later on the Murphy and Lake Toxaway branch lines. She didn't become a KS-1 until 1917, after multiple upgrades and modifications. In 1952, it and 722 were sold to the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad to work as switchers around Johnson City and Elizabethtown, Tennessee, with narrower switcher-style bunkers. On December the 8th of 1967, the KS-1s were traded to the Southern for two Alco RS-3s and reverted to their previous Southern specs to be used in the railway's steam program. 630 entered in February of '68, with 722 joining in August of 1970. The Excursions became so popular that by 1977, after less than a decade of heading them, the KS-1s had been superseded by larger superpower locomotives to take over the increasing workload, and loaned to the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum in Chattanooga.
Eventually, though, 630 was retired again in November of 1989 for a major overhaul, with it finally being donated by Southern's successor, Norfolk Southern, in 1999. The overhaul took 10 years, being completed in March of 2011, just 3 months after 610 ran for the last time. TVRM didn't have any operating steam locomotives between the time of 610's last run and 630's return.
As of the making of this recording, which is May 26 of 2024, 630 is the only one on this list that I've actually seen under its own power in person. Speaking of iconic steam locomotives from the Southern, Number 4. Southern 4501, the very first of the MS class, was also the very first Mikado owned by the Southern, with its vast history beginning at the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia in October of 1911. Similar to the KS-1s, the MSs looked very different when first built, and given multiple upgrades over time in revenue service. Her life on the Southern was uneventful, and in 1948 was sent to be scrapped in Indiana. Luckily, the Kentucky and Tennessee Railway stepped in and bought the MS on October 7th when its general manager, L.C. Bruce, stumbled upon it. In 1961, future TVRM founders Robert Soule and Paul Merriman stumbled upon the 4501, which was now Kentucky and Tennessee number 12, in Kentucky when documenting the final operating steam locomotives in the east of the United States. Its distinctive Southern looks led to Merriman buying the MS after K&T retired and replaced it with Alco S2s in 1964.
After a thorough restoration, the 4501 returned to the high iron sporting its original number and the Southern's Virginian green and gold lining scheme.
They couldn't get their hands on the sole surviving PS4, which did wear it in revenue service,
and pulled the very first steam excursion train of the Southern steam program in August of 1966.
4501's first excursion career, which lasted until 1998 on both the TVRM and Southern, later Norfolk Southern, was eventful. The biggest highlights include double and triple headers with the two KS-1s, and later the bigger engines like Norfolk and Western 1218 and Texas and Pacific number 610.
When she wasn't running excursions, the MS appeared in 5 movies. One of them was 1974's Riding the Rails, the Great American Train Story, that featured singing legend Johnny Cash at the throttle for the Hurt music video.
Maybe the biggest moment of 4501's life was in October of 1969 when it and Savannah and Atlanta number 750 were seen side by side at Steamorama in Anniston, Alabama, with the most famous steam locomotive in the world, the one, the only, Flying Scotsman from the former London and Northeastern Railway of the United Kingdom. This happened at most months after having its old tender replaced with a larger one from a scrapped Central of Georgia 2102. her first excursion career was not without bumps, because she did suffer a number of mechanical issues and sidelinings. She was eventually retired after its boiler certificate expired amidst rising operating expenses in September of 1998. But when Norfolk Southern temporarily brought back the steam program in 2010, TVRM began a full rebuild on 4501 in 2011. Since its completion in 2014, the once green Mikado has remained active.
Number 3. Reading T1 number 2102. Oh yeah, you should have seen it coming because it's a Reading T1. One of the most well-known American steam locomotives. All 4 surviving examples have not only run an excursion service at some point, but have been involved in major events in the history of steam locomotive preservation, good and bad.
These things weren't built as Northerns originally, but as I-10SA consolidations by Baldwin in 1923. 30 of the 50 locomotives were rebuilt into what became the T1s at the railroad's Reading, PA shops in 1945. 2102 was originally 2044 before its rebuild, following which it was assigned to heavier freight trains until 1956, when it was sold to Carpenter Steel to be used as a steam generator. After being badly damaged in a fire at the plant in 1960, the T1 was returned to the Reading, who immediately refurbished it for the Iron Horse Ramble trips.
2102 subsequently joined 2100 and replaced 2124 in 1962, running until the Rambles ended in 1964. From 1965 to 1985, the T1 ran multiple excursions under multiple owners, reaching as far as the Midwest. The biggest highlight was the time she and Canadian Pacific
1278
masqueraded as Delaware and Hudson locomotives for that railroad's sesquicentennial in 1973.
1985 was when 2102 finally ended up in the ownership of the Reading and Northern Railroad after being seen at the Reading, PA shops for the 40th anniversary of its rebuild. But after 6 years with RNN, she was retired again when her flu time expired, and then went on a quarter-century hiatus, which involved spending 2 years at Steamtown for a restoration that never materialized. It was not until 2016 that a full restoration finally began, with 2102 coming back to Steam in April of 2022. Given that it happened 8 months before 425 went down for its ongoing 1472, this could not have been better timed. Number 2. Burlington Route 01A, number 4960. The Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad, better known as the Burlington Route, took order of its final batch of Mikados in the form of 60 01As from Baldwin in the same year that Flying Scotsman was built. The 21st member, 4960, lived an uneventful revenue service life of pulling freight trains in the Chicago and Beardstown divisions. Similar to Union Pacific 844, this engine wasn't retired when her revenue service ended in December of 1958 because she was immediately brought into the Burlington Steam Excursion program, with her first fan trip happening on the 28th between Chicago and Galesburg and back. By 1960, the 01A and the now long-deceased 04B Northern number 5632 were the only steam locomotives running excursions. With the exception of rear-ending a passenger train in Douglas, Wyoming, along with the diminishing supply of steam mechanics, 4960's first excursion career in the West and Midwest was otherwise positive and successful. The highlight being when she was painted gold for the semi-centennial of CB&Q's entry into Casper. This Mikado even substituted for the diesels in 65 when the Mississippi flooded.
After pulling the final steam excursion on the Burlington, 4960 was subsequently donated to the Circus World Museum, only to quickly end up at the Mid-Continental Railway Museum in North Freedom, Wisconsin, where it sat dormant until January 1981. That was when she was taken east to be refurbished in the former Jackson Iron and Steel Company steel mill, and then moved to the Bristol and Northwestern Railroad, a former Southern line, where she operated under lease until 1984.
But with the economic recession of the 1980s leading to 4960 being used less and less, she was retired for the second time the following year. Then, she was left to sit dormant in the Cassad shop in New Haven, Indiana, under the care of Gary Bensman.
In 1989, the O1A was subsequently bought by the newly formed Grand Canyon Railway, where she was eventually returned to steam in 1996. But the journey to that place did not go as planned.
Norfolk Southern wouldn't ship the engine because of pits in its axles, so all of its wheels had to be removed and repaired at the railway's Birmingham, Alabama shops. But it took them months to correct the issues. So long that KSAD's owners threatened to scrap the wheelless 4960 over its prolonged stay. Naturally, the GCR crews panicked and resorted to shipping the O1A in pieces on flat cars, and in the process, the original smokebox was damaged beyond salvaging while being torched off the frame saddle. By the time 4960 arrived in Williams, much of its components had corroded. The grueling restoration that began in 1993 saw the boiler completely rebuilt with a new custom smokebox alongside mechanical upgrades, including 8 traverse tubes in the firebox, sections of which, as well as every flue and tube, were completely thrown away for welded duplicates.
We've modified the smokebox, made a new one. It's a little smaller than the original. It also has a different headlight and bell configuration. We also modified the sand dome up here.
The boiler has a brand new smokebox, new stack, new front and rear flue sheet, all new tubes, new superheater units. The builder's plates that you see up there are all recast. The hinges that are on the front of the smokebox are original. They were taken off the original smokebox door and reused. The sand dome on the top there was lowered 3 inches and the stack was lowered 6 inches. The steam dome was also lowered 3 inches. This air pump is not original. It had a water pump here, but we elected to remove the water pump and put an injector on the engineer's side. We have 2 air pumps. If one goes down, we always have a second air pump that we can bring the train home. The firebox was completely rebuilt, all new stay bolts and sleeves. These are the sleeves, all brand new cap sleeves. Side sheets were completely replaced. The combustion chamber, the rear door sheet, the rear flue sheet, the front corners inside the firebox. On the back head inside the cab, we replaced the part just around the door. We replaced 2,400 stay bolts. Of those, 900 were flexible. Back in this area underneath the cab here, we had to do a lot of modifications to adapt this big tender. One of the things we had to do was raise the back end of this frame up 6.5 inches to match the buffer on the tender. You can see how it matches up real well now.
The original Burlington tender was a scrapyard wreck, and not big enough for a round trip.
The old tender was rotted out completely. It would not hold water.
So they had to get a larger 18,000 gallon tender from scrapped Sioux Line 482 number 4012 and convert it from coal to supply 3,800 gallons of oil.
The 4960 was also given a massive makeover with a boiler tube cowcatcher and a center-mounted dual-beam headlight on the smokebox door being the most significant. After 30 months and $1.6 million worth of overhaul, on July 9th, 1996, the O1A, reborn as Grand Canyon 4960, moved under its own power for the first time since 1984.
Since its rocky return to steam that almost caused her to meet the same fate as Grand Trunk Western 5629 and fellow CB&Q locomotive 5632, the 4960 has been consistently running on the GCR. With the exception of a few operating hiatuses, the end of 1472. Although the railway has made more modifications to cope with changing times, you still wouldn't even know it's a CB&Q locomotive until you did a Google search. 3 other O1As survived, by the way. Her new life has a rich history of events. The most recent was when she wore the whistle of Southern Pacific number 982 to promote its ongoing restoration. Which coincidentally happened exactly 5 years after Union Pacific number 4014 returned to the main line. My personal favorite was when it triple-headed with running mate number 18 and Santa Fe number 3751 in August of 2002, just 4 months before I was born. Okay, yeah, I had to go on for a bit because I really love the West, especially all the railroading stuff about it. And also because this is the only engine on this list from a Western railroad. Everything else just so happens to be denizens of the east side of the Mississippi.
And that brings us to the biggest question of the list. What can top 4960? Well, if you know enough about American steam, it shouldn't take you too long to work out, because it was my idea this whole time.
But as per my typical fashion, we always load you up with some honorable mentions before number 1. This time, some more examples of formerly retired steam excursion stars, but also some that are making a comeback or just don't qualify to be on this list. And now, the number 1 formerly retired steam excursion star from the United States of America!
Norfolk and Western, number 611. First, there was 1218 at the top of the retired lists before Union Pacific 3985 was retired. And now, here's the Queen of Steam herself, the sole surviving example of the smallest of Roanoke's Big Three, the N&W J-Class. These were built to the design of N&W's mechanical engineers to tackle the rising passenger numbers on the railway's premier passenger trains over the Blue Ridge Mountains that were becoming too heavy for the older K-Class mountain types.
With 70-inch driving wheels and a smart red and black streamlined shroud developed from other streamlined steam locomotives, the J's represented the pinnacle of American steam locomotive technology, being able to max out at 110 miles per hour with 5,100 horsepower and 80,000 pounds of tractive effort. They could also ride smoother than any Pennsylvania Railroad steam locomotive except the humongous S1. 14 of these magnificent Northerns were built in 3 batches between 1941 and 1950 in the railway's own East End shops in Roanoke, Virginia. 611 rolled out of the factory on May 29th of 1950, the first of 4 members of the 1950 batch, making them some of, if not the final, mainline steam locomotives built for an American railroad.
611 is a year younger than the Chesapeake and Ohio 1309 and nickel plate 779, the final steam locomotives built by Baldwin and Lima domestically, respectively, before they merged. Alco's last steam locomotive, now long deceased, was built 2 years before the J.
Her design was just as remarkable as her own revenue service, in which she pulled the N&W's premier passenger trains 667 miles over the Allegheny and Appalachian Mountains, as well as mail and local passenger trains. The J even ferried the Southern's Birmingham Special, Pelican, and Tennessean 209 miles between Monroe and Bristol, Virginia. What's more, she even double-headed between sister locomotive 613 on Dwight D. Eisenhower's presidential campaign train from Columbus, Ohio to Canova, West Virginia on September the 24th of 1952. Though similar to 4960's time in the CB&Q program, 611's revenue service was not without snags. She was involved in 8 accidents in her revenue service.
The biggest of them was on January 23, 1956, when she flipped over in the Tug River in Cedar, West Virginia while pulling the Pocahontas due to overspeed at a curve. Yet ironically, the Tug River wreck actually helped save 611 from being cut up when N&W sent it for scrap in Bluefield, West Virginia. Long story short, the J's post-wreck overhaul left her in better mechanical shape than the other J's waiting for scrap before it.
Vice chairman of the Roanoke chapter of the National Railway Historical Society and future Southern Railway officer William Claytor Jr. noted it when convincing then Norfolk and Western President Stuart T. Saunders to save the J and move it back to Roanoke. Saunders obliged, and it happened on May 22nd. After 2 excursions to Norfolk, the 611 ran for the final time in revenue service on a farewell trip from Roanoke to Williamson and back. Upon returning, the J was put in the Schaffers Crossing Roundhouse next to M-Class locomotive 475 and officially retired on October the 27th. Following 3 years being spent as a stationary boiler behind the Roanoke shops, Saunders donated the 611 to the Roanoke City Council. With a cosmetic restoration and upkeep, she was placed on static display at the then brand new Roanoke Transportation Museum. Speculation of 611 being restored arose in the 1970s. It was in the same time period the steam program trains on the Southern, later Norfolk Southern, were becoming so heavy they were looking for more powerful steam locomotives to take over for the existing ones. 2 weeks after becoming president of the Norfolk and Western on September 30th of 1981, William's brother Robert managed to get 611 leased for the program, and with it, the J was removed from its display, inspected, and taken to the Southern Steam Shop in Irondale, Alabama.
Then she underwent a full rebuild by a Southern master mechanic and his team under the supervision of 2 former Norfolk and Western employees. That rebuild only took less than a year to complete, with the 611 being steamed up on July 5th, 1982, 34 days after the Southern merged with Norfolk and Western into the modern-day Norfolk Southern Railway and replaced Chesapeake and Ohio number 2716.
With the steam program retained, and thus doubling mileage to use, the reborn J made its break-in run, with Robert at the throttle and his son Creston as fireman, from August 20th to 22nd. Now, we won't go into every detail about 611's first excursion career in which she became so famous. What we can say is that from that day on, the 611 was thrust into celebrity status among steam locomotives. For Roanoke Centennial, Robert called 611
Roanoke born, Roanoke bred, and Roanoke proud.
The American Society of Mechanical Engineers named 611 a historical mechanical engineering landmark and presented a plaque to the Roanoke Transportation Museum in 1984.
She's double and triple-headed with the most beloved steam locomotives in the eastern United States. Savannah Atlanta 750 on Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac trackage, Nickel Plate 587 and 765, Southern 4501, Frisco 1522, and even the A1218 on so many sections of the Norfolk Southern system before the Conrail split in '99, including my hometown of Huntsville, Alabama.
And when solo, the 611 has even ventured into North Florida and the Midwest, most prominently on CNW trackage from Richmond to the Midwest, on what is the longest one-way excursion between them on July 17, 1983.
Okay, there are so many ups and downs the J went through in its first excursion career alone, in addition to its design. It's no wonder she was nicknamed the Queen of Steam, and with 1218 were essentially the most famous celebrity locomotives in the eastern United States by the time it ended, right up with Western legends like 3751, 4449, 844, and of course 3985. Speaking of which, on September 28th, 1994, an excursion train intended for 611 to lead to Richmond was being moved at Kinley Yard in Lynchburg, Virginia. In the process, 9 coaches derailed. 2 of them were deemed unrepairable. In response, Norfolk Southern raised its liability insurance from $10 million to $25 million. Coupled with low spare system capacity and delayed traffic amounting to the problem, the railway's then CEO, David Good, decided to end the program on October the 29th. After a final round trip between Birmingham, Alabama and Chattanooga, Tennessee on December the 3rd, the J was taken back to Roanoke and retired for the 3rd time on December the 7th. From that point on, it seemed that the J's days of running were over, and that restoration would never happen again. But in 2011, Wick Moorman brought back the steam program, and once again, speculation of 611 being restored spawned. And by May 24th of 2014, it all came true when, after sitting dormant for 2 decades all over Roanoke, the 611 was towed out of the VMT and taken to the North Carolina Transport Museum in Spencer the next day to be restored again.
Then, almost a year later, on May 9th, the sole remaining J came back to life, and 12 days later was back on the main line, nicknamed the Spirit of Roanoke in the process. The 21st Century Steam program ended in response to Hurricane Joaquin, but that hasn't stopped the J and the museum from maintaining her dominance among other active steam locomotives in the eastern U.S. She's still been able to track onto NS trackage with much fanfare.
Not just on Norfolk Southern, though, because she visited the Strasburg Railroad in Strasburg, PA in 2019 and from 2021 to 2023. In the process, reuniting with the only other active Norfolk and Western steam locomotive, 475.
And yes, this is my footage of 611, and I apologize for the shoddy quality. My camera wasn't the greatest back then.
Then, the Virginia Scenic Railway in Goshen from September to November.
While 1218 and 2156 have little to no chance of returning to steam for now at least, 611 is still operable and continues to have a promising future of fame on the trackage of Norfolk Southern under the ownership of the Virginia Museum of Transportation.
The Queen of Steam, the spirit of Roanoke, and the sole surviving Norfolk and Western Northern type has been through so much ever since it rolled out of the factory at Roanoke for the first time.
From having taking the brunt of 8 accidents in revenue service to coach protection in the preservation era,
from doomed streamliner to celebrity courtesy of dedicated enthusiasts turned passionate railroad executives,
and from a static relic of the NNW to a living icon of American history in the entire eastern U.S.
It's no wonder why the J, number 611, has rightfully earned the titles and legacy it deserves for the millions of people, enthusiast or not, toward whom it's been a source of joy and awe, marvel, and respect on behalf of the entire American rail industry, its future, its history, and its employees, the people who built, maintained, and rebuilt her, and the preservation of steam locomotives.
And that's why it deserves the spot as the #1 pick on our list of formerly retired steam excursion stars in the United States of America.
And on that banger, we have officially come to the end of another Top 10. Big thank you to Railfan Ian 1225 for the idea of this topic and collaboration. Link to his channel in the description. Go subscribe to him and his other channel.
And thank you to Andrew, aka the Rocket City Railfan himself, for making this idea a reality and making it possible. And for the massive help. Also subscribe to him. And before I go, I just want to mention that originally my channel was gonna be called Peanuts Railfan 1225, which still exists, but it's a different name. It's now called Ian the Peanuts and Sanrio Fan. Now, please do not shoot me in the comments for that if you know what I'm talking about. You'll see it right here. But I, of course, as you guys know, I moved to my Railfan content, or I'm in the process of moving my Railfan content to my Railfan channel, as you know, Railfan Ian 1225. So make sure to go subscribe to that channel. It's a fresh new channel, and I would love the massive support because my videos are pretty high quality considering I usually just take them on a phone. So pretty impressive for that reason. But again, make sure to subscribe. I really need it.
Feel free to leave your own ideas for more top 10s in the comments, and if you would like to collaborate on my channel or your own, or even a version for steam locomotives from other countries. I'm Andrew, aka the Rocket City Railfan.
And I'm Ian, aka Peanuts Railfan 1225.
Have a great day.
Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again on the High Iron.